President and Vice-Chancellors, as public orator, may I present Professor Sir David Cannadine, a candidate for an honorary degree. Oscar Wilde held that anybody can make history, only a great man can write it. David Cannadine can be seen as living proof of that. He recognizes that history is a complex thing, and it takes an historian of exceptional talent to examine the complexities of the past and to present them accurately, lucidly, entertainingly, and without dumbing down. David Cannadine was born into a lower middle-class family with no university background. He came from that generation of post-war scholarship boys depicted in Alan Bennett's History Boys. From his Birmingham grammar school, he went to Cambridge to read history, and there his ability was soon recognised. As many of today's graduating students may recently have done, he visited the university's career advisor and hesitantly admitted that he'd really prefer to be a professional historian to joining the civil service. Fortunately, he was encouraged to pursue his true calling, and after achieving a double first, progressed to Oxford, where he was awarded a D.Phil. His thesis was on the Calthorpe family of Birmingham, and its combination of economic, social, urban, and cultural history was an indication of things to come. Then it was back to Cambridge, and from 1977, a fellowship at Christ's College. The head of that college, J.H., later Sir John Plum, was one of Leicester University's most distinguished early graduates and an enthusiastic advocate of making history accessible. His influence was felt by many of the next generation's finest scholars, including Roy Porter, Simon Sharma, and David himself. Accounts also credit Sir John with bringing David together with his future wife, Linda Colley, yet another of the up-and-coming historians at the college at the time. David and Linda were married in 1982. As historians of different periods, they did not collaborate, but they share ideas and discuss interpretations, constituting something of a powerhouse of historical studies. A further important influence on David's development was the late Professor Jim Dios of this university, the founder of the study of urban history as a discipline, whose legacy is continued in our Centre for Urban History. David has taken a personal interest in the field and in the work of the centre ever since, and we are delighted that Professor Dios's daughter is with us today. David's sure-footing command of the diverse topics and broad perspectives is apparent even from his early publications. Lords and Landlords, the Aristocracy and the Towns was a seminal publication and was followed by Patricians, Power and Politics in 19th Century Towns, these first books both published by Leicester University Press. They were followed by War and Death, Grief and Mourning in Modern Britain, and The British Monarchy and The Invention of Tradition. David participated fully in college life at Cambridge as a tutor, as well as pursuing his research. But he was now attracting international attention, and in 1988 he accepted a post of professor at Columbia University, New York, one of the oldest and most prestigious institutions in the USA. Perhaps benefiting from his physical separation from UK social hierarchies, this period saw the publication of further influential works on the British class system and the decline of the aristocracy. He was lured back to the UK in 1998 to be director of the Institute of Historical Research in London, making it a hub for historical research activity, notably with the development of online resources, and leading a project on the history of how history itself has been taught. In 2008, there was a further transatlantic calls, and David accepted a chair at Princeton, where he now holds the position of Dodge Professor of History. But he has not turned his back on this country. In 2014, he became Editor-in-Chief of the Dictionary of National Biography, surely the most distinguished and demanding of the many important editorial roles he has undertaken. And in 2017, he was elected President of the British Academy, the body of leading academics elected for their distinction in the humanities and social sciences. In this important office, David is essentially the spokesman for all the humanities in the UK, and surely nobody could be better qualified, for David Cannadine is no library-bound academic. His organisational energy has been brought to bear both on the DNB and on the organisation of the Academy. His networking and diplomatic skills are universally recognised and admired. His chairmanship is known to be tolerant, attentive, and decisive. These leadership roles, and many other public services too numerous to mention, have not reduced his academic productivity or clouded his insight as an historian. His biography of Margaret Thatcher deals with that controversial and divisive figure with the detachment few have managed. His short broadcasts on Prime Minister's props, Chamberlain's umbrella, Harold Wilson's pipe, are shrewd analyses of people and politics condensed into 15 minutes. His recent book, Victorious Century, the United Kingdom 1800 to 1906, manages the difficult task of combining an elegant overview with in-depth analysis. It also offers some well-judged pointers to understanding some of the issues which preoccupy our country today, if only some of our contemporary politicians were prepared to take note of them. David Cannadine inspires great loyalty and affection among his students, has been recognised by his peers with numerous prizes, awards and fellowships, and by the Queen and the nation with a knighthood. Now it is time for this university, with which he has had such a close association, to acknowledge the outstanding achievements of one of the ablest historians of our time. President and Vice-Chancellor, on the recommendation of the Senate and the Council, I present David Nicholas Cannadine, that you may confer upon him the Honorary Degree of Doctor of Letters.
Well, that's the last one. Very well deserved. Thank you. I go all the way. Yeah.
Lord Lieutenant, Lord Mayor, President and Vice-Chancellor, members of the University, distinguished guests, fellow graduands and families, ladies and gentlemen. I am hugely flattered, greatly delighted and literally honoured to be here today, in part because I have just heard such extraordinarily kind and generous things said about me. Far more kind and far more generous than I could ever possibly or plausibly hope to deserve. And in part because it is a huge pleasure to join you, graduates in history, politics, international relations, media, communications and sociology, all subjects dear to my heart, on what is, I hope, for all of you, a great day of achievement, recognition and celebration. Here we all are together, pavilioned in splendour and girded with praise. And so my first and most agreeable task is to offer all of you my warmest and heartfelt congratulations on what you have achieved while you have been here at Leicester, and to hope that this great day and this most important rite of passage are occasions you will never forget. And although, unlike all of you, my Leicester degree is honorific rather than substantive, as has already been mentioned, this is a university with which I have a very close association and fond connections. One of my mentors was indeed Sir John Plumb, who graduated from here when it was but a mere university college. And he then went on to become one of our very greatest historians, as perhaps some of you may do in turn. Another was indeed the late Jim Dials, Professor of Urban History in this university, who virtually single-handedly created that subject, and in so doing was one of the pioneering figures to put Leicester University on the international academic map, and it is a great pleasure indeed that his daughter Linda Dios is here this afternoon. And finally, I must mention my sister Margaret Cannadine, herself a graduate of this university, though in geography rather than history, and she too is present today. So I feel in many ways very much at home in Leicester, although that in no sense diminishes my gratitude, but rather increases it still further. Across American campuses, the ceremonials of graduation are usually called commencement, on the grounds that time spent in university is merely preparation for life in what is called the real world, life which only begins once you have obtained your degree. And it's undoubtedly the case that the subjects that all of you have studied, ranging across the humanities and the social sciences, should equip you especially well to make sense of the world in which you are going to be living and working on into the middle of the 21st century and beyond. But do not make the mistake of thinking that just because you've completed your degree, this means your education is now over, done with, ended, and finished. For your time here should also have equipped you for life with a constant intellectual curiosity. Never cease to learn. Always keep your mind open and alert, and never forget that education, by whatever means, is a lifelong enterprise, of which your time here at Leicester is only one phase, albeit perhaps the most intense and important. I wish I had known when I was your age what I know now. And I hope by the time you reach my age, you will feel the same about yourselves. Because that's what happens if you're always willing and eager to keep on learning. It's also important to be always willing and eager to keep on learning because, in the words of a cliche, utterly hackneyed, but hackneyed because it's true, things keep changing. When I was your age, which was not only in an earlier century, but I rather blush to say in an earlier millennium as well, very few people would have predicted the end of apartheid in South Africa, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the demise of the Soviet Union, the revolution in IT, the great advances made by women in higher education, the professions and the workplace, and the enormous changes in attitudes to homosexuality and same-sex unions. In all those ways, today's world is immeasurably different from that in which I grew up. And by the time you reach my age, the world will once again be unimaginably different from that in which you and I are living now. So let me urge you never to be afraid of embracing the challenges and opportunities of change, and always to be open to the many new possibilities, prospects and perspectives that will undoubtedly appear and emerge during your lives. Let me also urge, in fitting keeping with this international university, let me urge upon you the need to keep a broad and global perspective on yourselves and on this country. As many people have pointed out, Global Britain is more a slogan than it is a policy. But for all of you, it ought also to serve as an injunction and as an imperative. For we do live in an ever more joined-up world. And if it seems likely Brexit does indeed happen, then the greatest challenge and opportunity you will face as you make the journey of life will be to keep Britain looking outward and to stop it turning in on itself in a narrow, myopic and mean-spirited way. And the best way to do that, the best way to keep looking outward, is to keep up your languages and learn some new languages whenever you have the chance to do so. There is no better way to obtain an understanding of other countries and other cultures than to study their languages and their literatures. And if global Britain post-Brexit is to become a reality, We are going to need many more people with language skills, and I hope an appropriate number will be graduates of this university. Let me also invite you to ponder the challenges and the paradoxes of freedom. Of course, we should be grateful that we enjoy a great deal of it in this country compared to many others. But let us remember that such liberties are not guaranteed. That for most of human history, they did not exist for most people. That in many parts of the world, they do not exist today. And that there are ominous signs all around us that democracy is in retreat, even where it does exist. Nor should any of us ever forget that freedom for the rich is very different from freedom for the poor. That freedom for white people is often very different from freedom for people of colour. That freedom for men can still be very different from freedom for women. That freedom for heterosexuals is in many parts of the world very different from freedom for those of other sexual orientations. That freedom for the healthy is very different from freedom for the chronically sick. And that freedom for the well-educated, such as all of you, is very different from freedom for those who have received limited schooling, if any. Let me also invite you to consider very briefly the idea of peace in our world and in our time. Despite the wishes of most men and women in the past and undoubtedly today, the reality has been and is that peace is far from being the default mode of human existence. It has to be constantly worked for, tirelessly brought about, unceasingly made to happen, and then energetically cherished, vigorously safeguarded, and constantly sustained. The Good Friday Agreement, for example, would never have taken place without the determined efforts made in Belfast, Dublin, London and Washington to bring peace to Northern Ireland. And we must hope indeed that that agreement will continue to hold. But the comity of nations can never be taken for granted. And as we get further away from the end of the Second World War, it's become all too easy for too many people in this country and elsewhere to assume that it can. That is a very mistaken assumption, and I very much hope that in your time and day and generation you will work hard at making peace happen and ensuring it continues to do so. Those are some brief thoughts of mine that I offer to you as you set out, having graduated, on the great journey and the great adventure of life after commencement. In the nature of things, you will experience disappointment, sorrow, rejection, loneliness and grief, as we all do. But you will also experience joy, hope, happiness, laughter, fulfillment, achievement and love. And I hope that the balance will be overwhelmingly in that direction. So let me end with a benediction wishing you well and an exhortation urging you on. It's from the Old Testament, and although that means these words are perforce time-bound, place-specific and culturally particular, they also have a serious relevance and significant resonance in the very different world, by turns multi-faith and globalized, in which we find ourselves today and in which you will increasingly find yourselves, not just tomorrow and next year, but in the decades far beyond and for the rest of your lives. They are from the book of Joshua, and they are as follows. This is my command. Be strong and of good courage. Do not be frightened or dismayed. And may your God be with you wherever you may go. To which I can only add my own renewed congratulations and good wishes. And may this great day and this splendid ceremony always mean as much to you as they will certainly mean to me. Thank you.